I'm Loris Alexander. This is Bridge City News, and here are some of the top stories we've been following. A national refined priority list has been issued as to who should get the COVID-19 vaccine first. One student in Lethbridge held a food drive as part of a school project. And the Lethbridge Public Library will be accepting food donations as payment for fines this Christmas season.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Thanks for joining us. Canada's National Advisory Committee on Immunization issued a refined priority list for who should get a COVID-19 vaccine first. Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Teresa Tam says the first 6 million doses Canada expects to receive this winter should be enough to cover the people on that list, which includes long-term care residents and staff, people over the age of 80, frontline health workers, and adults living in Indigenous communities.
Canada is well positioned to provide access to safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines for all Canadians, and an initial supply of vaccine is expected to become available in early 2021. We know that supplies will be limited at the outset. Therefore, Canada's National Advisory Committee on Immunization, or NACI, has released its latest guidelines, providing further recommendations for the initial sequencing of key populations for early COVID-19 immunization. NACI recommends that initial doses of authorized COVID-19 vaccines should be offered to residents and staff of congregate living settings that provide care for seniors, adults 70 years of age and older, beginning with adults 80 years of age and older, healthcare workers, including all those who work in healthcare settings, and personal support workers whose work involves direct contact with patients, adults in Indigenous communities where infection can have disproportionate consequences. These 4 groups of people, as things are rolled out, should be covered by the initial doses. But I just have to caution that given there's so many different parameters and uncertainties, we just have to be prepared for unexpected things to happen, deliveries, etc.
A 10-year-old Lethbridge boy is holding a food drive as part of a school project. Sydney Barantes is planning for a second trip to the Interfaith Food Bank to drop off donations he's collected.
I just kind of wanted to help people who need food, that don't have enough money to buy some, and help them out. On the first day, I was going to collect food with the bin outside, and I was going to collect food in that bin. My mom posted an ad on Facebook for me in many different groups, and we also notified the food bank about it. They posted the ad too for me to get food collected. I am tallying all the food in a chart. I feel happy to know that I'm doing something good for community and people.
You know, it's so fantastic to see youth doing such productive things in the community, and kudos to Sydney for choosing to do a food drive like this. It's going to help so many families this Christmas.
Do you have late fines due at the Lethbridge Public Library? The library is partnering with local food banks to help out the less fortunate this Christmas season. As Micah Quinn explains, this initiative is imperative in aiding the community and is a fun way to get people to the library for a good cause.
The Food for Fines program started on December 1st and will run until the 13th. And if you have overdue library fines, the Lethbridge Public Library is encouraging residents to make a non-perishable food item donation for the Lethbridge Food Bank and the Interfaith Food Bank.
The way it works is people can bring donations for the food banks to any of the library branches. They make their donation of the foods at the library, and then each item of food that they bring in is worth $5 off of their overdue fines. So Lethbridge Public Library members can bring things in, it benefits the food bank, and it gives them a little help if they have any fines existing on their accounts.
Last year, the Food for Fines program raised 4,595 pounds of food, which is equal to $11,947. 4 ramen noodle packages are equal to 1 donation and $5 off library fines.
And so we encourage the community who have fines to be able to go and donate food items and get those fines removed off your account. This does not apply to any lost items or any other account charges that community might have, but it's to be able to support us with food support and get your fines reduced to zero.
At the Interfaith Food Bank, in-kind donations have been down due to not as many gatherings and the COVID-19 pandemic.
Whereas the library is open and people are able to go and drop off their food donations there. With COVID, we are going to be extra especially safe. Yeah, we always encourage non-perishable food items that have good food value in them. So we encourage things like pasta, canned meats, canned vegetables and fruits, and tend to shy away from things that would offer, more salty or not as nutritious options.
To find out when the Lethbridge Public Library locations are open to make a donation, you can go to lethlib.ca. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Victim Services Unit in Lethbridge needs help reaching their fundraising goal. The facility dog program supports hundreds of kids each year and is solely funded by fundraising initiatives and donations. Their 2021 calendars are now out, featuring some of the heroic pups.
It's so hard to even pin down in a couple sentences how much we rely on these animals to help support our victims and how good of a job that they do doing it. They're both ADI certified dogs, so Assistance Dogs International certified. So it's no different than being licensed as a doctor or a social worker, right? So we have a lot of pride that we take in these animals because of all of the training and everything that they've gone through. It really is quite amazing to see how they can ground someone and just absolutely make you love them in a second.
The new calendar in support of victim services is $20. The Canadian Transplant Association, Green Shirt Day organizers, and Vistaprint Corporate Solutions have created a Together Strong face mask as a special fundraiser for Canada's organ donation community.
Green Shirt Day has gone out of its way to contact different organ donation groups, organ donation awareness groups in Canada, and see if they're interested in doing a mask. And there was an interest in that, so Vistaprint was contracted to make a mask, and $5 from the sale of each mask goes to an organ donation group. So example would be Canadian Transplant Association, Heart Life Foundation out of Vancouver, and for each mask that's sold, they get their logo on the mask. They then get $5. So the Vistaprint's already sold 5,000 masks, so away we go.
On April 7th of 2018, Bernadine and Toby Boulay offered to donate their son Logan Boulay's organs following the Humboldt Broncos' tragic bus crash in Saskatchewan. They did so because Logan had registered as an organ donor and had spoken to his parents about his wishes. To date, there have been over 300,000 Canadians signing up to become organ donors. With Christmas around the corner, many have begun their Christmas baking. We spoke with a Lethbridge baker who brings sweet inspiration needed during these dark times.
Today we are making shortbread cookies, which are perfect for the Christmas season.
Ingredients needed for this easy-to-do recipe include eggs, butter, flour, and vanilla.
So we're just gonna roll it out, and then we're just gonna punch out in our lovely Christmas shapes. So we're gonna do some Christmas trees. So we're gonna pan these up and they go in the oven for 11 minutes at 375, and then we'll let them cool and then we can start decorating.
For those looking to skip a few steps, Boots My Bakery has do-it-yourself decorating kits.
With our DIY decorating kits, you get 6 cookies, some candy, and some icing bags. It's important to just massage the icing bags first, so then the ingredients get mixed up again.
And let the decorating begin.
So there we go. Tuck those in. And there you have it, an ugly Christmas sweater.
Recapping one of our top news stories, Canada's National Advisory Committee on Immunization has issued a refined COVID-19 vaccine priority list. Dr. Teresa Tam says the first 6 million doses expected this winter should be enough to cover everyone on that list. And taking a look at weekend weather. Another beautiful day today in Lethbridge, and more days like it are expected for now. Just a few clouds tonight with a low of 0. For tomorrow, lots of sunshine with a high of plus 10 degrees. After the break, catch our interview with BCN's Jeanette Rocher discussing diabetes awareness for the month of December with Dr. Seema Nagbal, Vice President of Science and Policy for Diabetes Canada.
Diabetes is an illness that seems to be on the increase worldwide. But what is it exactly? What causes it? And are we getting any closer to finding a cure for this? Joining me to discuss this further is Dr. Seema Nagbal, the Vice President of Science and Policy for Diabetes Canada. She joins us via Skype from Ottawa. Dr. Nagbal, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Now, we often hear of type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Can you first of all explain what the difference is between the two?
Diabetes is a disease where the body can either not produce insulin or can't use it properly in the body. And insulin, of course, is a hormone that's produced by the pancreas, and its role is to regulate the amount of glucose in the blood. And blood sugar must be carefully regulated to ensure that the body can function properly and that there's no acute health crises because of an extremely high or low blood sugar. So type 1 is diabetes, is a disease where the pancreas does not produce any insulin. And the cause of type 1 diabetes is unknown, and it's really not preventable at all. Type 2 diabetes is much more common here in Canada and around the world, and that's when the pancreas cannot effectively use or produce enough insulin. And that's in about 90 to 95% of Canadians living with diabetes.
Okay, so how widespread is it in Canada? And you just kind of gave us some stats there.
Yeah, there's about 11.5 million Canadians living with diabetes or pre-diabetes. So that's 1 in 3 Canadians living with the condition. Right now, at the age of 20, Canadians face a 50% chance of developing diabetes in their lifetime. So it has huge implications for the individuals, families, society overall. It's a very large epidemic of diabetes that we're facing.
Right, now you mentioned pre-diabetes. So what exactly is pre-diabetes?
Prediabetes occurs when an individual's blood sugar levels are high, but not yet high enough to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. If a person has prediabetes, they're about 50%, they have a 50% chance of progressing on to develop type 2 diabetes.
Okay, so do we know what the cause of diabetes is? Like, are there ways to prevent it?
And I think that's a really important question because people have preconceived ideas of diabetes being a condition, specifically type 2 diabetes being a condition that a person brings upon themselves. And that's very untrue. We know that there are risk factors that place a person at higher risk for developing diabetes, and those can be thought of in kind of 2 different ways: as modifiable risk factors, those we can change, and unmodifiable risk factors. And certainly in the unmodifiable risk factors, we know that a strong family history, aging, certain ethnic backgrounds, these are things that a person cannot change, and that might place them at a very high risk, and it might be very likely that a person develops type 2 diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
Modifiable risk factors are ones that are within a person's control, and they can try to eat a healthier diet or become physically active. But sometimes, even despite best efforts, those unmodifiable risk factors really are too strong to overcome the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. So it's a complex condition with complex risks, and it really needs to be thought of in a more broad way. And the time for blame and shame is really over.
Okay, great. So now how would someone know if they have diabetes? Like, what are the symptoms?
Right. So I think that the symptoms are heterogeneous. They vary a fair bit across individuals. A person can feel increasingly thirsty. They may have to urinate more frequently, increased fatigue, blurred vision. Sometimes with type 2 diabetes, the symptoms are absent completely. So it really is, it varies from person to person, but really requires, if a person feels changes in their health, a connection with their healthcare provider to investigate what's going on and to get that addressed as quickly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. What are the long-term effects of diabetes?
So yeah, the diabetes can result in complications that are quite significant. A study a few years ago showed that it doesn't have to, though. That with monitoring and treatments, that a person with diabetes can live as well as a person without diabetes. But we do know that diabetes can increase a person's risk for strokes, heart attacks, kidney failure, as well as amputations and vision loss. So there's very significant complications that can occur and really require a person to be active in their own care and working with a diabetes care team that can help prevent those complications.
You'd mentioned before that a 20-year-old could have a 50% chance of developing it or not. So what are the factors that person could develop it? Is there anything that they can do to prevent that?
Right, and I think that interacting with a healthcare team where you're in close connection with a physician, a dietitian, a pharmacist, a nurse, these are all things that help a person identify potentially their own barriers to achieving a glucose that's within their target range, or and help to select the right treatments and therapies that work for them. And that's the best thing that can be done, to work with your healthcare team, to understand your condition, and to be supported through your family, your community, that allows so that you're allowed to access your treatments, to monitor your blood sugar, and really get a goal for what your treatment is supposed to achieve, and try to achieve those goals.
So if a young person eats like too much sugar, could they develop it, or is that a myth?
That's really a myth. I mean, healthy eating is really important, of course, for everybody. You don't develop diabetes because you eat too much sugar. No, it's really about the risk factors in type 2 diabetes that a person has, and how to the best degree possible to manage those risk factors through healthy eating, physical activity, stress management. These are all things that everybody wants to do and should focus on. But especially if you have a family history, or with aging, if you come from an ethnic background, like I said, these are all things that together may increase a person's risk. And there's no there's no way to prevent type 1 diabetes, and that idea that if a child or a young person has developed type 1, that they ate too much candy, it's really it's a myth, or a story that's told that is unfortunately works against the stigma that people already feel when they develop diabetes, and really should be displaced with more knowledge and truth about the condition.
Yeah, that's a very good point. How is type 2 diabetes treated and managed?
Well, at the onset, often it's managed through diet therapy, through healthy eating, regular and consistent physical activity. Ultimately, we know that diabetes is a progressive condition, meaning it continues, and most people will require medication to manage their diabetes. So often it is a combination of diet, physical activity, monitoring, medication use, and stress management for type 2 diabetes. For type 1 diabetes, it always requires insulin and monitoring, as well as those very healthy lifestyles that we all try to achieve with healthy eating and physical activity.
Great. So can you tell us about some of the newer methods of treatment, implanted devices, that type of thing, and can you tell us how effective they are?
Yeah, well, we know that specifically with type 1 diabetes, a person needs to inject insulin, and some people with type 2 also need to inject insulin. That can be done through a needle, as well as and in recent years, it's not incredibly new, but in recent years, insulin pumps have been used to deliver insulin into people with requiring insulin. New other developments in technology means that people can have access to devices that monitor their blood glucose. These are flash monitoring devices as well as continuous glucose monitors. And these devices allow people to know their blood sugar through an easy mechanism, because a sensor is placed under their skin, and they can use a device to continuously look at their blood sugar. Traditionally, people would have to prick their finger to get a drop of blood onto a test strip, and would have to test the blood sugar in that way. So there's more innovative ways that make blood glucose monitoring easier, and the delivery of insulin easier through a pump, that make controlling blood glucose a bit more easy for people living with diabetes who require insulin.
Okay, and have there been any recent developments in finding a cure or in transplanting a pancreas or something of this nature?
Yeah, that's a great question. Interestingly, there's been some recent news about scientists at the University of Alberta who were able to, in animal models, cure diabetes. And that's been a very interesting line of research, and we certainly hope that this process will translate into new discoveries in humans. So this is something that we're watching very closely, and especially timely, considering that 2021 is the 100th anniversary of the year that Canadian researchers discovered insulin, and brought this discovery to the world, and offered people living with diabetes around the world a chance to live long and healthy lives. So these researchers out of Alberta provide promise, and we really hope that it translates into something that's able to provide humans with a cure for diabetes. You also asked about pancreas transplants, so I'll just touch on that for a moment. And transplants are sometimes performed for people with diabetes, and these are surgical options that are often performed at the same time as pancreas transplants. And these are usually patients who are at high risk for kidney failure. And it's typically reserved for those people who have serious complications of diabetes. And that's because transplants themselves can have serious complications, and the medications that are used afterwards can cause side effects. So certainly it's an option for some people, but we're not quite at a cure. And in the meantime, we're looking for ways that we can offer people living with diabetes a way to manage their condition and to live long and healthy lives with a better and better quality of life.
And I would imagine that diabetes must have some sort of an impact on mental health as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
It really does. People with diabetes are often overwhelmed or frustrated by the burdensome demands of managing this illness. They are at greater risk for developing certain mental illnesses, and people with mental illness are at greater risk for developing diabetes. We know that depression is more common in people with diabetes compared to the general population. So it's a real issue, and something that might be overlooked. The term that we often talk about is diabetes distress. And that's something that's very real, because there's no break from diabetes. It's a 24/7 condition. You can't go down south to get away from it. You can't go out for dinner to get away from it. It's something that is forever present, and something that people need to develop ways to manage that burden and that stress over time.
I can imagine. Now, you'd mentioned so much in the interview about managing your diet and eating healthy. Is there a certain type of diet that is best to help manage diabetes?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about the best diet, the diabetic diet, sometimes people say. I would just say that the best diet for somebody is a healthy diet that they can sustain. These binge diets that are very difficult, where you lose some weight for a short amount of time, but then that eating pattern is not sustainable, That's not what somebody should be shooting for. It's really a healthy, balanced diet that is sustainable over time. That's what somebody should be focusing on, and working closely with a dietitian to identify goals and help select a pattern, identifying things that work well for the individual. There's no one size fits all here. It's really individualized to your lifestyle and your culture and what you like to eat and your eating patterns. Those are all things that require a lot of thinking and planning to make sure that it's a good fit and it's something that you can keep up with.
Makes sense. Any final thoughts or advice for someone with diabetes or anyone who maybe is worried that they could be developing it?
Yeah, I think just making sure that you get the resources and the support that you need. Checking out our website at diabetes.ca is there's some really good information about how to reduce your own personal risk if that's something that somebody is willing to try to do. For people living with diabetes, there's lots of resources on our website as well. But working closely with your healthcare team to make sure that you identify what you wish to shoot for, that your own health goals, and that you're working towards that with your healthcare team. I think that's really important to make sure that your own goals are well defined and that you're working towards those.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Nagpal, for the information. Dr. Seema Nagpal, the Vice President of Science and Policy for Diabetes Canada. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
The federal government continues its fight against climate change with a number of bills and proposals. Some say this is making for great progress. Others believe it's highly ineffective. Joining me to discuss this is Dr. Ross McKittrick, a professor of economics at the University of Guelph and a senior fellow at the Fraser Institute. Dr. McKittrick, thank you so much for joining me today via Skype from Guelph.
My pleasure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Absolutely. Now, you wrote an article in the Financial Post on the proposed federal CFS, or Clean Fuel Standard. Can you tell us what exactly the Clean Fuel Standard requires from us?
Well, the standard is it's not directed at ordinary air pollution. It's directed at trying to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that is released from the fuel being burned. And the only way you can really do that is to blend in various forms of biofuels. So it'll mean blending in more ethanol into gasoline and biogas into natural gas. And the hope is that on a life cycle or an engineering basis, there's less carbon dioxide emissions from that blended fuel. The effect of this will be, because these are more expensive fuel streams, biogas and ethanol are more expensive to produce than regular fuel, it will raise the cost of fuels. Depending on how stringent the target is, one estimate from the Canadian Energy Research Institute is that the price of natural gas could be pushed up by about 60% to fully comply with this rule. They may not push it that far. It's still a bit hard to tell. But it'll also add probably 5 to 10 cents per liter to the price of gasoline. And the effect of this, the government hopes they will reduce national carbon dioxide emissions or greenhouse gas emissions by about 30 megatons, which would get us partway to the Paris climate target, but certainly wouldn't be enough to get us there.
Right. So although the term biofuel may sound good because it requires fertilizer, water, and land to produce, that process itself can increase pollution. And some say it costs more in energy to produce than you would actually end up saving. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, that is right. If you start with, for instance, a crop of corn, to turn it into ethanol is a very energy-intensive process. And a lot of it is actually done in the United States, where they use electricity from a very fossil fuel-intensive electricity grid. So that's why when we look at the actual emission reduction from switching to ethanol, you have to look at it on this life cycle basis. And if it's in the end, if it's actually the case that you get lower emissions from ethanol, it's not lower by much. It's lower at the tailpipe level, but it's on the life cycle basis. Some estimates are that depending on where you get the ethanol from, we actually would increase total emissions.
Okay, so the whole point of the clean fuel standard is to reduce carbon emissions from the use of fossil fuels. But we already have a carbon tax that's being imposed. So why do we also need the CFS forced upon producers and consumers?
Yeah, that's a good question. The rationale for the carbon tax is it gives everybody a financial incentive to find the cheapest way possible to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. In economics, we like those kinds of policies because then you can say, all right, we're going to agree on how much emission reduction we're going to achieve. This is the way to do it at the lowest possible cost. But that only works if then the government stands back and lets the system work. If they let the market find those solutions under the incentive of the carbon tax. What they're doing here is actually undermining the carbon tax because they're saying to the fuel producers and the fuel users, all right, you still have to pay the carbon tax, but we're also going to add this extra set of rules. Specifically, you have to blend in all these biofuels into the liquid and gas stream. And it's happening at a much higher cost than the cost of complying with the carbon tax. So they've really unraveled the efficiency aspect of the carbon tax doing it this way, but of course they're still requiring us to pay it.
Yeah, this doesn't sound like an economically feasible plan, but will it actually make a difference? Will it reduce carbon emissions significantly, especially as our population continues to grow and demand for fuel continues as well?
There's a conflict between the goal of reaching the Paris targets and holding our emissions permanently below the target level, and also trying to increase the workforce much more rapidly than we've done in the past. And the government's trying to pursue both goals at once. The reality is that the population growth that they have in mind over the next few years will more than offset any of the reductions from the clean fuel standard. We ran into this problem with the Kyoto Protocol many years ago. A lot of people have forgotten all about that, but the government of the day signed a treaty in Kyoto promising to get our emissions down by a fairly ambitious amount and keep them down after 2010. And then it just turned out to be very expensive to do that because the technology isn't available that would let us use fossil fuels the way we do in a large, cold, spread out country like we have. We can't use fossil fuels to run our cars and heat our homes and get emissions down by the amount that they promised. So we ended up abandoning the Kyoto commitment. We're going to run into the same problem with Paris, that the government they can put these policies forward. They're very expensive to try. In the end, they don't actually accomplish what the government hopes that they will. And so something's got to give at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Why is net zero so important to the government? Why do we have to get there regardless of costs? Carbon dioxide in and of itself isn't a pollutant. Is it not, in fact, very necessary for a healthy planet?
Well, yeah, carbon dioxide has never been regulated in the past because it's not a local air contaminant. We regulate carbon monoxide and particulates and sulfur dioxide and other forms of local air pollution. But we didn't used to regulate carbon dioxide because, as you say, it is a natural part of the atmosphere and it's essential for plant life. What's happening now, though, is with fossil fuel consumption, that does release carbon dioxide emissions. And the concern is that over the long term, that can have an effect on the climate. And so the idea of going to net zero carbon dioxide emissions, which is a far more radical target even than the Paris Accord targets, the government seems to have adopted that without much in the way of a discussion with the public about why we need to do that, how much it would cost, and whether there would even be any benefits of doing it. And even though they pushed the deadline forward into the future, they are already proposing, like the Clean Fuel Standard, some policies that if they go ahead with them, they will be very expensive for people. And I think people deserve a better accounting from the government about why it is that they think this is so important to do and just how much they expect people to pay.
Interesting. Now, green activists argue that clean energy will be an economic boost to Canada, and we shouldn't worry about the fossil fuel industry ending because we can quickly replace it with green energy. So how realistic is that?
It's not at all realistic. I've been hearing the same thing now for 20 years or more. Every time the government proposes one of these policies, you will have environmentalists and also sometimes the representatives of the renewable fuels industry or the wind energy industry coming along and saying, don't worry, there'll be lots of jobs in these new sectors. Typically, though, for instance, our experience in Ontario going the green energy route, they said it wouldn't affect electricity prices, but the reality was our prices more than doubled. And they said that it would create a lot of new jobs. And the reality was that because of the increased electricity prices and the loss of manufacturing that went along with that, we lost at least 2 jobs for every job that was created in the renewable energy sector. And then the renewable energy sector jobs are only temporary anyway. Once the turbines are built and the solar panels are built, there aren't really ongoing jobs in that sector. So it is not the case that green energy is an economic opportunity. If it was an economic opportunity, you wouldn't need to force people to do it. The market would just pursue the opportunity the way people pursue any other profitable opportunity. The reason we have these policies is precisely because the market realizes these are money-losing industries and they don't create jobs.
Interesting point. Now, you point out also that we all want clean fuel, but apparently for every dollar of environmental benefit from the CFS, we actually lose $6 of income and wealth. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so that comes from tallying up the costs of compliance with the regulation and then also the indirect cost to the rest of the economy from the higher fuel prices and the reduction in the value of investments and things like that. And then, so you have that on one side of the ledger. And then on the other side, we look at, well, what are the benefits of reducing the emissions? And right now, the government sets the carbon tax rate based on scientific estimates of what is the benefit of reducing carbon dioxide emissions. And so if we take the maximum value from that schedule and we say, okay, we'll value the emission reductions using the government's own estimate, then it turns out the costs of the policy are 6 times larger than the benefits. So we can say, yeah, we'll take the government at its word that these emission reductions are valuable, but that's not the end of the story. We are incurring much larger costs to get those emission reductions. And going back to the point of the carbon tax, one of the essential pieces of logic of the carbon tax is it says we'll pursue emission reductions, but only up to the point where the costs of further reductions end up costing more than the benefits. And that's why we initially would go with a carbon tax type policy, because then it ensures that you don't get into a situation like we are in with the clean fuel standard where we're getting emission reductions, but the costs are far in excess of the benefits.
Now, the federal government also recently tabled new legislation, Bill C-12, that would force current and future federal governments to set binding climate targets to get Canada to net zero carbon by 2050. Any thoughts on what this means for Canadians? Should we be concerned about potential increases in taxes? And what about the impact this might have on things like the cost of gas, groceries, home heating, and anything we purchase?
Yeah, these are all valid concerns because in order to accomplish the goal, you have to make energy a lot more expensive. There's just no way you can function in a country like Canada without using energy. And if you are going to get people to use less energy, you have to make it more expensive. Now, the legislation, it's a bit tricky for one government to say they're going to bind all future governments to this plan. Really, all a government can do is bind itself to a plan, but they can't pass a law today that every government from now on is bound by, because a future government can always repeal the legislation if they want. I think the concern that's raised here, though, is just it signals that the current government is absolutely determined to pursue this path, and they are not particularly concerned about how much it's going to cost people, and they're not really listening to that side of the story.
Is anyone thinking about how excessive spending on climate change is impacting other areas where tax dollars would be put to much better use? Like maybe healthcare, education, fighting crime, reducing poverty. The list could go on.
Well, we think about that sort of thing in the economics profession. I don't think it's nearly prominent enough in the discussion. So going back to the green energy example in Ontario, because of these very high electricity prices, the government has said they're going to help some of our manufacturing and industry groups with lower electricity prices by transferring the cost of some of those expensive green energy contracts onto the taxpayer, basically putting it into the government budget. And that's going to be $3 to $3.5 billion per year just to get the burden off the manufacturing sector for the electricity costs. Now you think about what that means. That's a pharmacare program that we're not able to have because the money is going to cover these contracts. That's services for families with disabled children. That's upgrading hospitals in smaller communities. That's a lot of things that aren't going to happen because we are paying for contracts for electricity that we could have got much cheaper. We didn't need to pay that money in the first place. It's wasted money. And with something like the Clean Fuel Standard, you're asking people to pay maybe 50 or 60% more for the same natural gas that they were getting previously. And you have to ask for what? And that's money out of household budgets. That's going to mean money out of farm budgets that they have to pass on to consumers in higher food prices. Yes, these are all absolutely legitimate questions. And the sad thing, as far as I can see, is that no, the government is not particularly interested in these questions.
Thanks so much, Dr. McKittrick, for your insight. Dr. Ross McKittrick, Professor of Economics at the University of Guelph and a Senior Fellow at the Fraser Institute. Thanks so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
The COVID pandemic has impacted everyone, but imagine how much worse this would all feel if you were in a strange country, not knowing the language, and cut off from family and friends back home. There are close to 341,000 newcomers to Canada, and a number of them are right here in Lethbridge. Joining me to speak about how they are getting the help that they need during this pandemic is Jackie French, the Executive Director of Southern Alberta Ethnic Association. Jackie, thank you so much for joining me today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Now, first off, let's talk a little bit about what the Southern Alberta Ethnic Association does and why it exists.
Well, we've been here, well, not in this location, but we've been in existence for just over 40 years. And basically, we are a multicultural hub. So we allow different cultural groups to come in and showcase their culture through events and presentations. So it allows different cultural groups to celebrate their holidays and festivals and their culture while welcoming the community and having them participate and learn about the different cultures that we have within our groups.
So with all these newcomers here to Canada, and of course a number of them are here in Lethbridge, how many different languages and cultural backgrounds are represented in your membership, Jackie?
So we have about 25 different groups that are members here at the Multicultural Center, and of which many different languages. So one group, for example, might have 5 or 6 different languages within that group. So it's tough to say how many languages exactly, but for our membership, we have about 25 different groups.
And how many different translators do you have?
Well, translators we get from Lethbridge Family Services. So if somebody is in need of a translator, we will hire a translator through Lethbridge Family Services and get them to assist us with either translating a document or translating for us. We do have some members and staff members on site that speak different languages as well. So if we can utilize them, we do. And if not, then we reach out to hire a translator.
Okay, and speaking of languages, a lot of your members struggle with that language barrier, and that sort of isolates them from the community. So, how have they been handling this crisis? How are they feeling about it all?
Yeah, I mean, COVID is very difficult for everybody, but it's especially difficult if you're from a different country and, you know, this is all new to you and you don't know a lot of people, you don't have a lot of family around, so that makes it even more difficult. And you could be living with a stranger, you know, different circumstances. So that's why we're trying to offer this program to help with that.
Now, Jackie, your organization has a COVID-19 assistance relief program, and this is brand new. So, what's the main objective of this new program?
I mean, the main objective of this program is to assist our members and to assist newcomers. So, COVID can be difficult to understand when you have a language barrier or if you're alone. So, basically, the program is set up to help people that are struggling with anything to do with COVID. So it could be if they're in isolation, they may need somebody to go get groceries for them, or they may not know how to set up a COVID test. So we're receiving a lot of calls about that, is they need assistance to help set up for COVID tests, or they may need help filling out EI forms, or for CRB application, or any kind of government documents that they may struggle with reading the English language. So, or I mean, sometimes it's hard enough even for us to understand those documents or how to fill out those forms. And so imagine having a bit of a language barrier. So we're assisting with any kind of that, you know, any kind of assistance with that. They may also need help with supplies. So they might need sanitizer, or they might need masks, or they might need to know, how do I care for my husband that has COVID? So we assist with that. We also assist with job search. So they may have lost their job due to COVID. So they may be struggling, well, where do I find a job? So we try to help with that. Really anything, or translation of documents, or they may need us to set up doctor's appointments for them, or maybe they're struggling with depression or isolation, so then we can set up appointments for counseling for them. Really anything to do with COVID, we try to help with that.
And are these volunteers then that you have set up to help your membership, or are they your employees?
Yeah, currently we're using our staff, and then we have hired a contracted COVID relief program coordinator. And so he is one of our members, and he was doing this project with his own group. And now I said, you know, what a great idea. Let's expand this to our whole membership. And so we applied for some funding, got some funding, and now he is contracted, and he's in the office here twice a week, Monday 9 to 3 and Thursday 3 to 7 for drop-ins, but he's accessible at all times. So they can contact the office and we can put them in touch with Santos, or they can pop into the office and we can put him in touch with Santos. He can be here in a matter of 10 minutes. So we set up a couple days a week where he's in the office for drop-ins, or he sets up appointments during those time, but really he's accessible any day of the week.
I'm sure he's quite busy these days.
Yeah, he is quite busy with this, actually. So we're finding that a lot of the members are utilizing it and needing some help. So I'm glad, you know, I'm glad that we're doing it, but we want to just make sure we're reaching everybody with our membership and newcomers. So letting them know that we're here if they need any assistance.
And what are the biggest resources your members are struggling to access?
Most of them, like I said, are supplies. So if they are in isolation and they need groceries, or they need masks or sanitizer, we can take that to them. We can go get groceries for them. They just e-transfer us the money or give us the money when we get there, but we can make sure that we get the supplies to them if they're in need. A lot of them have been reaching out to fill out, you know, EI, permanent resident card renewal. We've had some of that. We've had, you know, we need help filling out the CRB, setting up appointments for COVID testing. They're not sure where to go. Reading government documents, they might need a translator. And then We also are providing, we're in touch with the public health on a weekly basis. And so we're trying to update and send out that information to them, or if there's a real language barrier, we might call and have that information translated to them.
You'd mentioned they're able to access counseling as well. So what types of counseling are they being offered?
You know, mostly it's isolation and depression issues, right? I think there's a lot of the community in the world really struggling with depression right now because of COVID. And so if we have had some people reach out to us for that reason, and so then we would refer and set up appointments for that counseling services.
And Jackie, what have you been hearing back from the membership about this program?
The feedback that our coordinator has been getting is just people are really grateful for the help. Because of the lack of understanding and the struggles, people are just really glad that we're here and that we can give them some kind of assistance. So we even had somebody reach out to us, which is probably the best story I can tell you. I think he reached out to us because he needed some groceries. And then when our coordinator went there, he was in extreme pain, and he was a 73-year-old man. And didn't have any family here. And so our coordinator actually took him to emergency and then got a volunteer to go there and sit with him. And then, you know, until he could get through emergency and then return home. And also that person was struggling a lot with finances, because living on an old age pension is very low income. And so he had some health problems, and so our coordinator was also able to help him and get him set up with AISH. And so that's probably currently our biggest helpful success story. But I mean, there's several people just reaching out that we're helping, and they're just happy that they're getting some assistance.
It sounds like a really great program, Jackie, and maybe talk a little bit about some of the other projects the Southern Alberta Ethnic Association is working on.
Normally we do some great programming, some cultural programming where we have big festivals and events, and due to COVID, we haven't been able to do that. So one thing that we are able to still do in a little bit different, safer manner is our Taste of events. So pretty much every month we have a Taste of event where we make a different, one of our membership groups comes in and makes a cultural dinner from back home. And then we do a pickup dinner. And so what we've been trying to do to make it a little bit more fun and educational for the community is we'll set up a little bit of a display when people come in to pick up their meal. We might have a video playing of some background of that culture. We'll have a flat sheet with some information about that culture and about the food that they're eating, and some display items that they can look at. But we do have some inclusion and diversity workshops that we're working on. So we're hoping to reach out to some of those companies, or if there is a company out there that has a lot of newcomers working there and immigrants, please reach out to us, because we can help with some training for that. That's something that, you know, we've done in the past, and we want to kind of become a leader in the community of. So we would like to offer more information and education on inclusion and diversity. So if you are a company that's looking for that, please, you know, reach out to us and we can help you with that. In the past, we will have some more upcoming, we do a lot of language courses online. So in different language, it might be Japanese or you know, whatever. I think we did one in Arabic that we'll probably do again, because that one was quite popular. Spanish is very popular, so we'll be running some more language courses online, and those are free to our members. And with COVID, I think we had a small fee before, and we may even offer it for free. But anyway, watch our website and our social media platforms, or feel free to contact us and we can put you on our email out list. Make sure that you get all that information. Come January, we've partnered with the library, the Lethbridge Library, so we'll be offering Canadian citizenship courses, and just trying to do some different things. We have to pivot our programming a little bit to more online stuff as versus in person, unfortunately, due to COVID. So we're trying to pivot that programming and make sure we're still helping our members and the community to educate them on different cultures and in a fun and inviting way.
And how can viewers look you up and get in touch? What's your web address?
So our address is saea.ca. And our phone number is 403-320-1577. And our email is info@saea.ca.
And you're located right here in Lethbridge. What's your address?
Yeah, we're located at the Multicultural Center. So it's the Southern Alberta Ethnic Association, but we manage the Multicultural Center and we are located here. And our address is 421 6th Avenue South. And we really do have a beautiful facility here. And so part of the other thing that we do here so that we can stay afloat is we have facility rentals. And because of COVID, of course, we're just doing small things right now, but we have a beautiful facility here with a couple great ballrooms and a couple great meeting rooms. So come down and visit or look us up if you're having a small wedding or a small meeting.
Jackie French, Executive Director of the Southern Alberta Ethnic Association. Thank you so much for joining me today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.